Aloha and welcome to our video on transporting across the membranes. We're going to talk about active and passive transport and compare exo and endocytosis. Okay, the first method of transport we're going to talk about is this passive transport system here, and we're going to talk about diffusion. If you remember diffusion, it was talking about how things naturally move from a high concentrate to a low concentrate. So here, if we look in our cell drawings down here, we'll see outside of the cell and inside. And notice that the area outside has a higher concentrate than the area inside the cell. So through the process of diffusion, as long as those particles can move through the cell membrane, they will do so and they will move in this direction. So we see them moving into the cell, and once we reach equilibrium, meaning that the concentration is the same inside and outside, then we'll see that the particles can move freely in and out of the cell. But what happens if those molecules can't move through the cell membrane? Remember, they form this little barrier here, so not everything's going to be able to go through this cell membrane. So then we talk about facilitated diffusion. And facilitated diffusion is where we use these protein channels, and that's going to allow things to move into or out of the cell. So it's still passive in the sense that it's happening by diffusion, but the benefit here is it allows larger molecules to move through because of the protein channels. Sometimes diffusion isn't enough, and then we talk about active transport. Now, active transport means that we are using energy. Okay, this is what active means, and that we're using energy to move these particles across the transport protein. Okay, so we'll say these molecules out here, even though the concentration is greater, it takes a little bit of energy to drive them this way. With active transport, we can also make it where we have a low concentration and a high concentration, and we're still able to move across this concentration gradient. Okay, finally, what happens if we have a molecule or we have something that's too big for the protein channels to come through? Then we have this neat process called endocytosis. Endo means inside. So what we're going to talk about is moving something from the outside of the cell, this needed substrate, and putting it inside the cytoplasm, moving it across the cell membrane. Now the way that that works is if we have our little particles out here, the cell membrane will actually start to pinch off a little bit like this, and it'll capture these in here, and eventually it'll pinch off a little bit more like so. And ultimately what happens is you notice that a little piece of the membrane here is pinched off, and we have what we were looking for. This substance here is now inside the cell. This membrane will dissolve or break open, and that'll get those particles, that substrate, into the cell for use. Now, endocytosis brings stuff in, exocytosis will get stuff out. So if we have unwanted substances inside the cell, then what it'll allow it to do is it allows it to get them outside of the cell relatively quickly. So the same process happens. We have a little membrane-bound vacuole here with our unwanted substances inside, and that's going to merge here with the cell membrane. As it does so, it's going to split open, so it'll come together and it'll merge like this, and then it'll split open as such, and we can see the net result down here that all of the products, all of these substances we didn't want have all been released outside of the cell. And this is exo. So endo means come in, exo means to exit or go out. Okay, let's review these types of transport real quickly. There are two types. We had passive and active. Remember, passive, it just happens, so it does not require energy. The active one here does require energy. We mentioned passive ones as diffusion and facilitated diffusion, and if that diffusion is water, it's going to be the process of osmosis. Now, when it's active, most of the time it'll use these transport proteins, but sometimes the molecules are so big that we end up having to use this endocytosis to bring it in, or this exocytosis to get it out of the cell. Okay, well, that's it for transport across the membranes. As always, our lessons will go into it in a lot more detail, but this should get you started. Good luck on your lessons, and as always, we'll see you at the next video.